Hello friends, happy March. I feel like it's been a little while since I've sat down and done a proper reading wrap-up and review type of video, so today we're going to be combining everything that I've read in January and February. These are all of the books that I have successfully completed in the past 2 months, and we're just going to talk through them, see what I remember, see what I think about them. Because another thing I feel like is worth mentioning is I didn't set a goal on Goodreads this year. I figured going into this year, I don't want reading to be such a chore. I want to read when I want to, and because I want to. Sometimes when you get caught in that cycle of like, I need to post another video, I need to have a higher number on the wrap-up, it can feel really intimidating and it can feel like you have to always be pushing yourself, and you just don't. We are not reading aggressively this year. We are not trying to get through everything just to say that we got through it. Anyways, all of that out of the way. The first book that I read this year, that I finished this year, is Nevada. I think Imogen Binnie is the author. I read it on my Kindle because at the end of 2024, we flew to Nevada and we were there for like 4 or 5 days. Really fun trip, really interesting to see such different terrain. It was surrounded by mountains and it was very, very cool. And I wanted to read something that kind of fit the environment, fit the place that we were at. So I was like, okay, this book is literally named after the state that we're in, so let me give it a try. I believe in this book you are following a trans woman who is in a relationship in New York with this other person who, it's not the greatest relationship. Like, she's doing her daily life and she's living with her average girlfriend, and then things don't work out and she kind of starts spiraling a little bit, and she's like, okay, well now what? I could literally do anything that I want to. So she takes the car and she goes on a journey. She just starts this road trip and she ends up in Nevada. And I will say a majority of the book is not set there. A lot of the book takes place in New York with this character who's just kind of struggling to get by and struggling with their personal relationships, which is fine, you know. But I was wanting a little bit more of the city that it's named after. And then you get to Nevada and you get the perspective of another character who is also dealing with gender things. And I think losing the perspective of the main character really took me out of the story, because I do like the other character. However, why did we stop following the main character as soon as we get to the location that we're actually talking about? Like, I think the story itself is fine, but it was just not what I really wanted the story to be. Like, the whole thing felt like build up, and then you finally get somewhere, you finally leave New York, you're going to where the story is meant to be about, and then it was just like, oh, actually it's over. The ending definitely felt kind of underwhelming. The next book I read was Isaac's Song by Daniel Black. I have to be honest, looking at this now, I do not remember a single thing about it, though I know it's a good book. I tabbed some places, I underlined some places. The entire story is set with this character talking to his therapist, kind of just about how to cope with life, how to deal with everything that's going on. And the therapist says, well, write down your life story, like from the beginning, and just go through your entire life. So in between this conversation with the therapist and the main character, you're also getting flashbacks in the form of kind of diary entries from the main character. I think this is a really good book, but the reason that I especially liked it is because of how it talks about his relationship with his father, who, it wasn't a very good relationship that they had. Isaac was more creative and not really a man's man, and his dad didn't necessarily like that. So now when he's trying to look back at his life, he is thinking about his dad and how he wishes his dad would own up to the things that he had done wrong. And he kind of feels like his dad limited the things that he was able to do, but this therapist is saying, well, no, if your dad spends 10 years telling you to be different and then 1 year making up for it, the dad's gonna feel like he made up for it, but the kid is still gonna feel everything that those 10 years did. So it's a lot about family. It's also a lot about the country and the bad things that go on. Like, it's not an easy book, but I did like it. And I'm sorry that that review isn't more in depth, but I honestly don't remember it. Then I read Blue Sisters by Coco Molors, but I actually really liked this book. I did read Cleopatra and Frankenstein, so I already knew I liked this author and her writing style. And then this is, I think, her newest release, and it has been very widely talked about. A lot of people like this book, and for good reason. In this book, you are following 4 sisters, but one of them has passed away. And so all of their dynamics kind of shift a little bit because they're missing that one piece of their lives. So you're following the remaining 3 sisters as they cope with this obviously huge change, whether that be by distancing themselves and maybe falling into unhealthy habits, or by trying to reconnect and trying to hold each other together. All of the characters feel very strong. There's nobody that feels like they're left out or pushed to the side. And you can see how they all kind of bounce off of each other. The oldest sister tries to hold herself together. She tries to be there for the younger one. She's kind of like the substitute parent because their parents weren't always there. But she's married, she moved away, she's trying to be this strong, independent person because she wants to be a good role model and she wants to seem like she is strong enough to not need support. And then one sister is a professional boxer, but she gave up her dream to go work somewhere else. And then the last sister is a little bit of a party girl. She's a model. She's doing a little bit more of that reckless behavior. But then when you get to see all of these characters a little bit more, you see that obviously there's going to be some more layers to who they are. Like when you're trying very hard to hold it all together and seem strong and independent, at some point that is going to start cracking. Eventually they do all come together and try to deal with this grief. They all have to fly back into New York where the sister had lived because they're selling the apartment. So they have to go through all this stuff, but they also have to all come together and deal with this as a group. So again, this book is really heavy on family relationships. It's a lot to do with grief and with family dynamics, but I highly, highly recommend this book. I think it was done so well. Holly by Stephen King is not something I really cared for. I've read a couple Stephen King books. I liked it a lot. I still think about that book frequently, but his newer releases have not done the same. Sometimes you gotta stop while you're ahead, and I think this is a perfect example of it, because this one and then Fairy Tale, the other more recent release that he had, they're fine. They certainly tell a story, I will say that, but did it need to be told? In this book, you're following this detective Holly, who apparently has been in other books. I didn't read those first. I don't think you need to. But you're following this detective who is looking for a missing girl. Her partner has COVID, which never really comes up besides the fact that he is just not helpful. Like, when I saw that in the description, I was like, oh, okay, this is gonna be a really modern book about, like, COVID and actual things that are happening. But no, it's just kind of an explanation as to why she's working alone is because the people in her life died of COVID. There's this whole thing that's talking about how the main character's mom believed in Trump and then got COVID because she didn't get vaccinated. But it doesn't really go anywhere besides to just say that Holly, the main character, is alone in the work that she's doing. But she's looking for this missing girl, and then separately there's this old couple that lives nearby that has secrets. I wonder, what could they be hiding? What goes on in the old people's basement, And then as Holly is going around this town, she's finding that there might be more than just the one disappearance, and maybe it's all connected in strange ways, and really, there are some things that should have been figured out a whole lot sooner. I actually was so worked up about this that I did write my thoughts on Goodreads. And I wrote that it brings up a lot of real-world topics, but then never really goes anywhere with them. Like, it'll call out the characters for being racist, but what is it saying that's going to actually have an impact? Or is it just saying it to be kind of edgy and be like, look, racism bad? Because that isn't actually helpful to do that. Especially when you're writing from the perspective of a character who is racist and you write slurs into your book as them. That doesn't make it okay. And I was like, okay, maybe there'll be a big twist at the end that'll really get me and I'll be so invested in how it ends. But no, the characters feel really bland, really neutral the entire time. And the twist is kind of non-existent. It's very, very predictable. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the entire story, not to spoil it, but it doesn't matter, is based around the idea that you would never suspect an old person of being capable of committing these crimes. Why not? Why would you as a detective not take them seriously? The entire time the detective is like brushing this couple aside because it's like, oh, they're too old, they can't do anything. And it's like, no, but you know that the person in charge of doing these crimes is playing into the fact that they can't, like, what are you talking about right now? The entire idea that it's based around, which is that, like, old people are innocent or too weak to do anything, is, like, so overdone and very, very inaccurate. There are a lot of evil old people, let me tell you. So it just felt like a really cheap ending, you know? And then, like all of his other books, it's not diverse at all. It very much reflects his own points of view, and it's just, like, come on, man. I get it, you're pumping out a lot of books, but are they worth reading if they're all just you? Like, you haven't taken any time to understand other perspectives and other lives? Or you haven't found a way to incorporate that into your writing? Like, that's confusing to me. And I think maybe it's time to slow it down a little bit if you can't figure that out. I then read The Wives by Simone Gorindo, which is a memoir about the wives of the husbands that went off to war around, like, 2008-ish. It's just talking about, like, military life, but for the people that are staying back. And again, this is really a book that focuses on individual identity, because when you go to some place like this and you're married to somebody that has to go away for this type of job, you become just an extension of them. You sort of lose your individuality and you become just the person that waits for them or the person that takes care of the house for them. So this book is a lot about the wives in this community and how they are dealing with their husbands being away or raising kids on their own or dealing with the house on their own. All these different daily things that become just a little bit different in this environment. The women were given memos on how to be wives during and after deployments. Their primary assignment was silence. Don't let on where your husband is or what he does for a living. On monitored phone calls, don't ask him when he'll be home or why he seems distant. Their lives become secrets they shared only with one another. Because at the end of the day, they can't talk about where their husbands have gone, and they also only live in this community where they're surrounded by other people going through similar things, so they end up kind of all coming together. And it's really interesting to read about the expectations that they have, or like the family obligations, where they're talking about how being a mother is like a requirement and it's a step that you have to take, and that's where you feel fulfilled. But then also how difficult that is, because you'll try to have a kid in between deployments and then maybe the dad gets to see the kid sometimes, so you're still just raising this person alone, and it's just all very difficult to deal with. And it's obviously a very, very real story, so I hope I'm explaining it correctly. But it's a lot about independent growth and also about community and building support systems when things are rough and that type of thing. A lot of it is just talking about how she's all alone and trying to deal with all of this pressure because you have to make everything okay for the husband who's away, who might come back. It's a lot to balance. It's a lot of expectations to handle. I thought this was a very interesting story. And then I saw on Book of the Month that TJ Klune was coming out with a new book called The Bones Beneath My Skin. I have, I think, 7 or 8 of his books. I really enjoy them. I think they capture, like, friendly feelings very, very well. I think they're very cozy, and I think in all of those books you can really tell how much the characters care about each other. In this book, you're following a man. He is grieving because of a death in the family, which is apparently a common thread through a lot of these books. But he's going up to this cabin that his family had owned, and when he gets there, he sees that it's occupied. It is not empty like it should be. There is another man and like a 10-year-old little girl living there, and they introduce themselves by threatening him. But as you get to learn about them, you learn that the little girl is not quite what she seems, because actually she is an alien. And throughout this book, you learn who this little girl is, where she came from, what her goal is, like where they're trying to go now, and who is maybe trying to get her. And throughout it all, you're also watching the main character and this guy that's protecting the little girl as they maybe develop feelings for each other. It's a very sweet book. It's a very classic run from the big bad guy type of thing. And the big thing is also just finding a purpose, because when the book starts, this main character is at a very low point. He just lost his job for doing things that he shouldn't have, and then he just lost his family, who he has a weird relationship with, and then he shows up to this house and all of a sudden everything changes. I have 2 more left. The first one is The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which I did read 3 years ago now. But I read it on my Kindle, and immediately after finishing it, I bought a physical version because my brother had bought a physical version after also reading it on Kindle because he wanted to annotate it. I saw that and I thought, okay, well, I also have to annotate it, because when I reread A Little Life, I went through and I tabbed it in the really aesthetic and unnecessary way where you have like 15 different colors and there's one every couple of pages, and it doesn't actually do anything at that point because there are so many, but it's still fun to do and it's still cool to look at. So I thought, okay, I need to do that with this book because there are a lot of characters and there are some big themes that are throughout it all, and I want to make note of it. 3 years pass and I finally decided to pick it up, and I did indeed go through and tab it all. And this is also the first time that I annotated in pen, because usually I'm afraid to do anything permanent to my books. I never want to make a permanent mark for fear of one day wanting to give it away and not being able to because of it. But at the end of the day, I bought this book specifically because I enjoyed it that much. So why not make it my own? Worst case is somebody gets a slightly more used book, like they'll live, you know? But in this book, you're following the main character, Richard, who goes to a really expensive school, and he joins a pretty exclusive club of people that are learning dead languages. He does not fit in with these guys. They're all super rich, super snobby, super disconnected from everybody else. And then there's this completely average guy, and he never really gets it with them. He never really fits in with them, but they do want him to feel that way. But this is kind of like the classic dark academia book, which is a lot of criticizing the current academic situation, calling out the ways that money can play a role in your education, or the ways that maybe certain classes are centered on not really the right things. Like, the characters are by no means good people, and that is fully intentional. You are not really supposed to like them. A lot of people like them for their aesthetics, but like as people, they are not good. They do bad things and they get away with it like it's nothing, you know? But I absolutely love this book. I enjoyed reading it so much the second time. I actually forgot how it ended so I was equally as devastated as the first time. And if you're curious, these are all the colors that I have tabbed. So I have one for each of the 6 main characters, one for Julian, one for the group as a whole, and then one for memories, because I felt like that was kind of a common thing that came up throughout the entire book. I honestly would open this one up and read it again right now. This is such a good read. I enjoy it so much. That's not to say it doesn't have its flaws, but I think in terms of storytelling, it is done really, really well. And then the last book I have is The Foxwife, which I don't think I liked this one that much either. I got this from Book of the Month. It's been sitting there for a while. I started reading it. I didn't really feel like getting through it. I got the audiobook. I didn't really like listening to the audiobook. It was like a fine experience, but it's not something that I'm ever really going to want to do again. And I mean that in the nicest way, because I do think it's a good story. I just personally was very, very bored by it. And I also think I didn't really picture the characters as how they're meant to be seen. Because although it is called The Foxwife, in my head, this is like a young child, and it's not. This is an older woman who had a kid that died. She can also turn into a fox. That's like the whole thing, is that she is a fox. You're set in 1908 in China. There are certain people that are foxes, and some places worship the foxes. Some people think that they're evil, so it really depends on who you run into, but you're following this main character who's trying to get vengeance because somebody killed her kid, and she's going through all this trouble to try and find the guy that did it. But then every single chapter you're switching between her and a detective who's looking for this missing girl that had died, and they don't know her identity, so he's trying to find who this person is, and then their paths sort of intertwine as you get further into the book. But I didn't really care for either of them, which is unfortunate. It felt like the guy was set up around this detective thing that didn't really go anywhere, because he kind of just guessed, and he was like, yeah, this person is almost definitely the person we're looking for, so I'm just gonna say it's them. And I don't know if it was ever confirmed, like, 100% that that's the person, or if it was just, like, an easy out. And then for this woman, it's like, obviously she is being led by grief, but what is actually going on right now? I don't know, it kind of just felt like things were happening and I never really cared about it. Which is frustrating, because I do think the idea is really cool, and I think the setting is really cool. Throughout this whole thing of her trying to find the person that killed her kid, she also encounters these 2 other foxes that I guess she has a history with, and you're seeing how they're kind of being tricksters and making her life more difficult. But it's like, I don't know these guys. I don't know her. Why would I care about these other guys that are messing with her that actually she has a long history with? And it's like, they're breaking the fox code. They're doing things that they shouldn't be, but are there consequences? It's just like a known thing that you shouldn't. But then it doesn't go anywhere when they do. There are some cute moments, but it just kind of felt underwhelming, and I was happy to finish it just so that it would be over. And that concludes my January and February wrap-up. I must admit, it definitely felt a little bit clunky. It felt a little bit awkward. I am very out of practice making these. I will say, as my TBR is getting smaller, I am more willing to make trips to the library. And that is sort of sparking this new excitement in my reading journey, because it's like, okay, now I can actually pick up books for real that are new, that I'm looking forward to, rather than the ones that are sitting there for so long, but without the stress of buying and owning it. So if I end up not getting to them, it's no big deal. And I think that's also definitely going to help me get through some more books, because I can just pick things up when I'm excited for them without any extra pressure. If you want to see some more book videos by me, you can subscribe to this channel, or if you want to support me elsewhere, you can subscribe to my music channel, Riverbend. As always, I'll have my socials linked in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!